All right, good morning. I'd like to call to order our March 2018 Left 2 Board meeting, and we'll go ahead and start with a moment of silence. All right, thank you. Welcome, everybody. So we do have a quorum present, and I believe we have Senator Warnock on the phone. I believe is our only call-in this morning. And we'll go ahead and start off with the approval of our minutes from December 20th, January 17th, and February 28th. And this information has been shared with our board, and I would entertain a motion to adopt. There's been a motion's been made and seconded to adopt. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Being and hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes. Minutes are adopted. Item number 2 is our legislative update, and Ryan Frost.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, before we get going, one of the things I wanted to bring to your attention, Ryan will be doing all of the presentations today, and we've got news. Paul Neal with the board team has accepted a position with the legislature. They stole him back from us. So I'm currently talking to people about filling his role in the future, and it may be something different. I tell everybody there's 60 things that I look for when I'm recruiting somebody to the team, and nobody has all 60. So most people have about 20, and Paul's 20 could be very different from the 20 that the new person has. But in the meantime, Ryan will be carrying all the, yes? That's exactly what I was getting to, yes. But also, for the recruitment, we've talked it over with Ryan. Paul has Paul's background, legal and policy. I also have that, and so does Tim. And so to the extent that the workload requires it, Tim and I will be sharing with Ryan. But for today, we're totally dumping on him.
All right, Ryan.
Thanks.
With that, you're up.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Chair, members of the board, for the record, Ryan Frost, board staff, and this is your 2018 legislative update. So there's 2 provisions of the supplemental budget that affected Left 2. One that was passed and one that was not. The first is contribution rates. The rates are continued to be fully funded. And the second proposal that was not included in the final budget was the payment into the benefit improvement account from last year. Governor Inslee's proposed supplemental budget did make that payment, but that payment was not included in the final budget passed by the legislature. The 2019 payment is still in statute as it stands today, but they did add some language that said that any distribution in 2019 or 2021 would be paid through alternate means, including possibly out of the Left 2 Trust Fund, as they did in 2015.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ryan, so that language had been previously vetoed when it's proposed in previous budgets. And I know the bill was signed yesterday. Do we have any clue if that was vetoed?
I haven't heard any vetoes as of this morning about that language.
We'll follow up on that
Yeah.
and let the board know.
Yeah. So there was 4 bills that were passed that affect Left 2 this session. The first was the interruptive military service credit bill. This was a result of the board's study from last year, which corrected the current definition of veteran by adding in specified conflicts that weren't named in statute, adding an end date to the Gulf War, and also addressing those members who had gone on multiple deployments to the same conflict, ensuring that they received service credit for both of those deployments. Second bill was the PTSD bill. This allowed industrial insurance coverage for post-traumatic stress disorders affecting law enforcement officers and firefighters. However, this is limited to stress from exposure to a single traumatic event. Multiple exposures to ongoing events is currently not covered still. The third bill was the McNeil Island Firefighters Bill, and what this did was add DSHS and the Department of Corrections to the definition of an employer for Left Plan 2 when they're employing firefighters serving at a prison or civil commitment center on an island. And lastly was the Left Plan 2 Board's Executive Director Salary Bill. What this bill did was authorized the Left 2 Board to fix the salary of their Executive Director, and the authority of OFM to limit that salary is removed. Some language was added late in session that requires that the board does consult with OFM prior to any sort of adjustments to the salary. And then there was 3 bills that affected Left 2 that were not passed. The first one was the presumption of occupational diseases. And what this bill would have done was make the occupational disease presumption for firefighters applicable to certain EMTs and public employee fire investigators, and also would have added additional cancers to the cancer occupational disease presumption. It would have created an occupational disease presumption for heart problems and infectious diseases for law enforcement officers, and also would have required the Department of Labor and Industries to convene a work group to recommend options for amending first responder occupations and diseases for application of a presumption. The second bill would have authorized community and technical colleges to establish a police force on their campus. Currently, only the state's four-year institutions have this authorization. And the third bill would have created a property tax exemption for spouses of military members or first responders killed in the line of duty. It would have created a lifetime property tax exemption for primary residences only, and it would have continued the exemption even if the surviving spouse remarried.
Patrick?
Ryan, on the presumption of the occupational, this is me on catch-up. What was the concerns on that one?
Came down to cost, I believe, one, and two, the burden of proof that some of these diseases hit the threshold to make it a presumption, the occurrence of them.
Is it something that we may be able to work on next year? I know it'll be pushed, but what's your feel?
It's on my next presentation, the interim planning presentation. It is a topic on there.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah. So Select Committee on Pension Policy had one bill this session. It provided a benefit increase to certain retirees of the PERS 1 and TERS 1 systems in a one-time increase of 1.5%, and that bill did pass as well. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
This is Judy Warnick. The governor did veto one section of the operating budget that included the left two pension transfers. It's Section 908, subsection 3, page 417. So he indicated he's done this in the past because he's concerned about the transfers, but that has been vetoed. So to answer that question, I just pulled it up because we got a report last night about the vetoes. So.
Okay. Thank you, Senator.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
Okay.
All right, seeing none, moving on.
So with that veto, that just means that the 2019 payment is still scheduled to be paid next year if the threshold is hit. Okay, moving on. Again, for the record, Ryan Frost, board staff. This is your interim planning for the 2018 interim. We'll start off with some of the actuarial items. I'm going to roll the first three into one description a little bit. So it is a rate setting year. The normal board process is to adopt rates for the following two bienniums, which would be for the periods of 2019 to 2021 and 2021 to 2023. The recommended rates will be included in the annual Left 2 valuation report from the actuary's office. And there's also the addition of possibly adopting a supplemental rate for the PTSD bill, as I mentioned in my ledge update. In the fiscal note, OSA estimated a rate increase of 5 basis points for the employer, 5 basis points for the employee, 3 basis points for the employer, and 2 basis points for the state. The board will have a preliminary presentation of the recommended rates in June or July, with adoption of those rates in the following month. Second is an update on cost of benefit improvements. This is a continuation of the benefit pricing that began last year. The plan is to explore pricing of a free survivor benefit first, followed by a 2-year AFC period. And if there's time for more pricings, we will explore those as well. And those pricings will be presented towards the end of the interim. And lastly is the funding policy discussion. So this is a continuation of the discussion that started at the October offsite last year, with the goal of adopting the funding policy that the board has actually used for the last 10 years, although it's not the policy that is in statute right now. And that is a variation of the entry age normal cost method. And as far as potential topics for the interim, if you have any questions about any of them, stop me at any point. If you have any recommendations or additions to the list, please add them whenever. The first is PEB coverage for catastrophic retirees. This was last heard during the 2017 interim. The policy issue here is that the board proposed a bill in 2009 to include catastrophic retirees and their survivors in the PEB program, but the Healthcare Authority attached a rather large fiscal note on the bill by assuming 14 new catastrophic retirees each year, and that bill ultimately failed. So today, catastrophic retirees receive a reimbursement of their health insurance premium costs up to the amount paid by their former employer for COBRA benefits. But having access to this PEB program would provide them with 2 additional benefits. First, the participant would belong to an insurance pool, including all public employees participating in PEB, and participating in an insurance pool typically provides a lower premium than can be purchased by the individual on his own. And the second benefit is that PEB pays Medicare Part A and B premiums for Medicare-covered retirees. The second issue is the disabled members' return to work. This is also last heard during the 2017 interim, and this issue came out of working with DRS on the Duty Disability Rulemaking Project. The issue here is that when a member is determined to have recovered from their disability, the member's previous employer is required to hire them back, but the employer sometimes disagree with DRS's determination that the member has recovered from that disability, and they appeal to refuse to hire that member back. And this puts the member in limbo because DRS has terminated their disability benefit, but the member is unable to go back to work because the employer will not hire them until that appeals decision is made. Next is the retiree return to work. This was last heard during the 2016 interim. The policy issue here is that before 2005, a Left Plan 2 retiree's pension stopped if they worked in a job covered by any statewide public retirement system. The board recognized that members may no longer be able to fulfill the physical demands of law enforcement or firefighting before they are able to retire, or ready to retire, or could afford to stop working. So the legislature passed the board's proposed career change legislation in 2005, which enabled retired Left Plan 2 retirees to start a second career in non-left public employment. The board intended to facilitate transition from a physically demanding profession to a second, less strenuous career. The board did not contemplate, however, enabling retirees to continue working as a law enforcement officer or firefighter while receiving their pension, which multiple news organization investigations found to be happening in 2012 and 2013. The next issue is standby pay as earnable compensation. This was also last heard during the 2016 interim. The policy issue here is that some Left Plan 2 members receive standby pay while off duty in exchange for being prepared to report to work on short notice. This payment is not considered compensation for services rendered and thus is not reportable compensation for Left Plan 2. There is some confusion because in 1995 the legislature found that standby pay should be reported for PERS members. It's just not reported for Left members. Next issue is the definition of child issue. This was last heard during the 2017 interim as well. The policy issue here is that the left definition of child excludes children adopted after retirement. Therefore, post-retirement adoptees do not qualify for left children's benefits. The widow of a Left Plan 1 disability retiree who adopted children after retirement sent a letter to the board and to the Select Committee on Pension Policy late last year, arguing that the exclusion of her children is discriminatory and was seeking legislation to include children adopted after the date of retirement within the left definition of child. But because the board's jurisdiction is limited to Left Plan 2, this would most likely need coordination with the Select Committee on Pension Policy, who's responsible for Left Plan 1. Next is the presumption of occupational diseases. This was the issue that I spoke about in my legislative update on the bill that did not pass. The issue here is that for law enforcement officers, there's currently no presumptive medical conditions covered for occupational diseases or disabilities. And for firefighters, there are a number of infectious diseases and cancers that are not covered under the current presumptive list. And the last issue is out-of-state duty. This was also heard late last year. The issue here is that an off-duty member who becomes disabled responding to a mass casualty incident has the same level of benefits as a member who becomes disabled from any other type of non-duty injury. There's been a recent push across the West Coast, especially in California, in response to the Las Vegas terrorist attack, where California had 200 police officers at that concert. They wanted to ensure that officers and other first responders can get assistance no matter where an incident takes place. And the California legislature also proposed a bill this last session to provide industrial insurance coverage for members if they are injured responding to any type of mass casualty incident while off duty.
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, so that was a lot in a very short period of time. So going back to the actuarial topics on the previous slide and these 7 topics, these are 12 items that are on the potential list for the interim. The actuarial topics, guaranteed they're going to be covered. All of the potential topics are ones that the board previously heard and deferred working on until this interim. So the tentative plan right now is to give you guys a introductory briefing, what we call on each of these 7 topics, bringing you up to speed. For instance, on the out-of-state duty issue, it turns out it may be issues even in state if you're out of your local jurisdiction. So those types of introductory issues, they might be different from the introductory or last briefings that took place on some of these back in 2015 or 16 or 17. The plan is that we would start kind of working these into the agenda for the interim. And then at the point that we give you the introductory presentation, we'd be asking you then if you want another a more detailed presentation on that topic. So up to and a final presentation. So these are all issues that you'll be getting education on, but I don't want you to think that there's any kind of commitment or expectation that they're all going to lead to recommended bills at this point in time. In addition to these, then, to the extent that there are other topics that your organizations discuss and would like the left board to consider as well, you could bring those forward at future board meetings and they could get added. We could have an introductory briefing on those as well, and they'd be action items at that time. For today, you do have a quorum, so if you wanted to, if there's any of these issues that, for instance, you kind of, I don't know if we want to talk about it or not, and you want to reach agreement now about potentially taking one of these or some of these off the agenda, you could certainly do that, but there's no requirement today that you take any action on any of these. The plan is we'll give you some introductory briefings at upcoming meetings, and you'll kind of be able to give us further direction at that time. With that, are there any questions about any of the 12 topics that Ryan just presented to you?
Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if we could talk about the definition of a child, and I don't know if DRS might be available to comment. I understood that they might be working with SCPP on this, or going to be working with SCPP?
Well, at this point in time, the SCPP hasn't set their agenda. I do know that the widow in the case that originally wrote the letter to the SCPP and to the Left 2 board has filed a suit against DRS, also alleging that the statute's discriminatory. Now, she's just suing DRS because if it's a pension case, that's who you sue, not because of any misconduct on the part of DRS. However, that may also then complicate, since there is pending litigation, that may complicate the department's ability to act specifically. So, leaving aside the department's role, the SCPP heard this issue last year and deferred it to the upcoming interim. I'm hoping that I will have a chance to speak to the SCPP at their April meeting to give them the board's preview of what's on your work plan for the interim, including this issue, and talk about coordinating. As Ryan mentioned in his presentation, the statute defining child applies to Left 1 and Left 2. The widow's issue specifically had to do with Left 1, and so it's certainly something the select committee might take on their own. Maybe the statute should be split. Maybe it still makes sense to define child the exact same for both plans, even though the benefits are slightly different. But that would be a potential topic of coordination. But until the select committee meets and has a chance to discuss that, we don't know what's going to happen with that, Mike.
Right.
So would your recommendation be to hold off then, for now, till we see what SCPP does, or?
Yeah, and we can, what we would do is just give you a reminder of what the current issue is, what the benefits are to Left 1, what the benefits are to Left 2, maybe that person's specific issue. So there's no need to hold off on that piece of it because it's just more educational rather than action at this point in time.
Can you give a rundown on the time frame? You talked about having additional presentations, so we're in March, and we hit
Yes.
April, May, and I know we don't meet a month in, is it August? We don't meet historically.
Historically, we don't meet in August. It's a good news, bad news for this session. The legislature ended on time on a short session, so the good news is you've got a long interim.
Right.
The bad news is that usually plays out one of two ways. Either you guys come up with 24 items that you want us to study, and we have 8 very busy meetings, or sometimes we'll only end up with smaller agendas then. When you have a compressed interim like last interim, the agendas tend to get packed, and so that'd be one of the things that we would be looking to you guys in the future. Does it make sense however the workload ends up playing out, we're okay either way. But it may end up that you want to combine some meetings. I would say at this point in time, with all the rate setting that you've got, plan on April, May, and June, and July, those 4 meetings happening. We'll probably combine a lot of these introductory briefings into April and May and take care of the rate setting and funding policy items that Ryan discussed during that same time frame leading up to rate adoption in July. And then at that point in time, you guys, you will have earned August off if that's your will, and then we'll have a better idea of what you want to do for September and October, leading into the end of session. Whether those meetings will be shorter or could be combined or something along those lines.
One of the questions that you had asked if there was any other ideas or thoughts coming from our organizations. Anybody have any other issues that they wanted to explore?
Mr. Chair, I actually talked to the executive about a window bill that we'll be discussing. Not right now. We're not ready. I'm not ready to discuss it right now. But when we make the determination of when we retire, sometimes there's information that comes forward, and you may think that you're signing up for the right retirement, and it turns out that you have a problem. And then, as we know, once you sign up for retirement, it's a contractual deal, and that may be something that we need to look at to say maybe somebody needs 30 days to 60 days to make sure they pick the right formula to move forward, and that might be something that I would like to look at moving forward. One of the other things, number 7, which is the out-of-state, and it could be in or out-of-state duty. Right. If I heard Ryan correctly, are you saying that the state of California passed a bill?
They proposed a bill. It wasn't heard in committee or anything. It was just a proposed bill.
Is there a way we can get a copy of theirs?
Absolutely.
Okay, I would like to see that.
Okay.
And instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, maybe we have one ready.
Yeah, I can get you a copy of that, definitely.
Thanks, Ryan. And from that point on,
I think the list that we currently have and what we went through during the interim of 2017 was pretty aggressive. I think there's a lot of information. I think that was probably why a few of those items still stayed on the board, because there's so much information, very in-depth. With maybe the addition of what you want to bring out there, I think we have a pretty good plan to move forward and start looking at those presentations, like you said. And just time-wise, if we can get those out, and I think the staff does a great job sharing the information, but maybe forecasting a calendar so we know ahead of time, which I think you usually do anyways, but just sharing that information ahead. Okay, this is what we're going to look at. These are the months we think we're going to probably take action, propose action. So,
Yeah, we would bring back a draft interim calendar for you at the next meeting.
Okay.
That would include introductory briefings on all of the 12 items.
Is there any opposition to what's out there right now on this list? That's one of the questions that Steve had mentioned, is that if there's things out there that we just don't think we want to look at right now, leave them on the list right now, go through the presentations, and we'll just scale it down as we go through the process.
Yeah, one positive is that all these issues the board has heard before.
Yes,
So,
which is helpful.
yeah.
And then part of your timeline that you mentioned would be also including the administrative proposals as well, as far as the rate changes and those things that we put in there as well.
Yeah.
Right? You had mentioned that was probably going to be to take action in June or May or June.
For the biennial rates, you have to adopt them by the end of July if you want to stay on the same time schedule as the Pension Funding Council for the upcoming bienniums. Technically, you've already adopted rates for the 1921 biennium, so that gives you a little bit of flexibility in terms of your actions.
Right.
You don't have that looming deadline the way the PFC does. And you'll be getting the actuarial valuation and some preliminary result of what the rate recommendations will look like from the actuary in that May-June timeframe, with the idea that you could take action in July. The supplemental rate that Ryan mentioned coming out of the PTSD bill, historically the way that works, and it's been a while since there was a pension bill passed that had a fiscal note impact, we contract with an outside actuarial firm to have those fiscal notes audited, and we'll begin working on that. And then that rate theoretically could go into effect as soon as September, depending on when you're able to decide whether you're going to adopt it or not. The fiscal note for the actuary's office assumes a September start date when they're calculating that cost. So if it was later than September, the cost in the fiscal note might be higher because you're missing out on some of the earnings. But we'll begin the audit process, and you'll be hearing about that. As you're going through the rate setting, we're going to be using that discussion as a reminder of the differences between the funding methods. The statutory method that hasn't been used except in the valuation for 10 years, and the current method that you're using, and what, if anything, the differences between those two are, with the idea then that this interim you could take action on whether you want to formally adopt the 10-year temporary funding method that you've been using and that you've used for at least for the upcoming biennium. So that just needs to be done by the end of the year. So that's a rough time frame for all of those items, but that's what you're looking at.
Any other questions? Okay.
I was going to say one other benefit to that is that you won't have 9 different contribution rates to choose from
Right.
when you're adopting rates if you pick the funding policy you've been using.
Yeah, which is helpful.
Yeah.
You like limited choices. I think that's helpful. All right.
I mentioned as well, I'll be talking to the select committee, hopefully at their April meeting. I haven't heard back yet as to whether or not that's confirmed. They haven't met yet, so their April agenda, I don't think, has been finalized. But once they've met and had an idea of what topics we're working on, then we'll be able to speak to you also about coordination and anything else that might pop up on their agenda that you might be interested in as well.
Any other questions for Ryan? All right.
So that brings me to my last slide, which are the administrative topics. First is the DRS rulemaking project. The duty disability rulemaking project finished up late last year, and so we're just waiting on the hearings to be scheduled for that. And we're hoping to move on to some other issues this interim with them. Second is the financial audit of staff expenditures. That's done yearly. Third, the directors of Department of Retirement System and the State Investment Board do their annual presentations on the administrative and assets portion of Left Plan 2. The fourth is the October offsite planning meeting that you guys have every year to go over strategic planning. Fifth is the annual AG training done by TOR. And sixth would be an alternate revenue update. We talked about it a little bit in the legislative update, what's been happening with that account. And so this would just be a more detailed presentation on historically what has happened and what it looks like is going to happen in the future. Any questions on any of those?
The alternate revenue one's a challenging one. There is statute. In the past, there's been questions from the board about what's the board's responsibility when the legislature doesn't fund according to that statutory requirement. Those types of things a lot of that discussion happened before many of you were board members, so we'll bring you up to speed on kind of where all of that sits and whether or not that ends up being something that the board also decides to work on during the interim, because that can very quickly turn into something that's not an administrative item but a policy item.
Right. Number 5 on the list is the annual AG training. Do we know when that might take place?
Discretion.
Okay, so
If you
what?
get a month's notice, I would appreciate it.
Yeah. Do we get to pick the topic too?
You,
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I'm open
Okay.
seriously to suggestions because it's good to mix things up from time to time. And I can craft a topic that will touch on the required areas. I can weave public records and open public meetings and ethics
Right.
and fiduciary duty into any topic.
Okay. All right.
Last year was on social media, if I remember correctly.
Yep. Questions, comments? Seeing none. Okay,
Okay. Yeah.
is that it? For you?
That's it.
Thank you. Flying through.
Yeah, we're ahead of schedule. I won't try to drag out the administrative update to the point that you guys are still here when lunch arrives. But to let you know that lunch is scheduled, I think, to start setting up at 11. But with that, for the administrative update, I do have a few items. And you can, again, please feel free to answer questions as we get into them. I've already mentioned Paul's change of position. Just going into that in a little bit more detail, I've already started talking to people, and don't have turnover on our team very often. The last time we had an open spot was about 5 years ago, and but I am constantly recruiting. One of the things that I tell people that I work with at other agencies is every time we're meeting, it's a job interview, whether they realize it or not. They may not ever have any interest in working for the Left 2 board, but if they do, that's kind of just the way my brain works. There's about a dozen people that I plan on talking to or touching bases with that I know of. And then this is the first sort of public announcement of the vacancy. And so I may hear now from other people. With Ryan's capabilities and with Tim and I willingness to help out, there's not a crisis at this point. You know, there's not an urgency to fill the position as quickly as possible. We want to make sure that we get the right person for the team and for the board, and if that can be done in 2 weeks, great. But if it takes 2 months, that'll work out as well. I will keep you updated, though, as far as how things are going, and you're certainly welcome to contact me at any time or ask questions about how things are going. Paul, I love this. Even after his last day at work, Paul was still in the office on one of his off days, working on finishing up the last video that he was working on before he went to work for the legislature. And so there is a new video out there on disability benefits that he was finishing up. I think that one's already been placed on the board site. If not, it will be out there very quickly. And Tammy's telling me it'll be put out there after the meeting. So by that, I'm guessing it wasn't put out there yet, but it will be shortly. A couple of outreach things to give you a heads up on. Tammy was at the March Concerns of Police Survivors spring meeting as a resource there for members, family members and stuff having experienced duty-related deaths. The State Council of Firefighters will be having their educational seminar in Spokane in April. We will have a table there. I'll be there with either Tammy or Tim to answer questions, and we'll have material for members that are there. May be doing a presentation as well on the new PTSD bill and how that plays out with L&I and with Left 2. With that, we'll continue with the quarterly budget updates. Now that we're into the interim, and Ryan already mentioned, we'll have the annual financial audit. They usually wait until the end of the fiscal year in June and then start doing their work in July with the idea that they're ready to go by September. If that changes, we'll let you know. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but administratively, that's where things sit right now.
Any questions? All right.
Let's see, I don't think I'm forgetting anything. We do have, yeah. Well, you guys are, there, I know on the agenda, there's also possible executive session. If you guys, I'll try to remember if I forgot anything that I can give you a heads up on when you come back from that.
Okay.
Tammy, or Tim and Jessica are here to assist you in executive session if necessary or required,
Okay.
and Tor as well.
Probably going to use all three.
Okay.
All right.
I want to plan on 30 minutes for that, and then,
Yeah, probably no more than a half hour, yeah.
okay, back at 10:45.
Yeah, for the purpose, make sure I get it right, Tor.
It's a test.
For the purposes of, let's go, to review the, let's get the exact one. Evaluate the qualifications of an applicant. Did you mean, Mr. Chair, that you intend to go into executive session to evaluate the qualifications of an applicant for public employment or to review the performance of a public employee?
Yes, second one.
Excellent.
All right, so we will take our break for no more than 30 minutes. We'll be back at, it's planned for 10:45. All right, we'll go ahead and call our meeting back to order. And I believe the senator is going to be calling back in here in a minute or so. We'll give her a chance. All right, who do we have back on?
I'm back.
All right, thanks, Senator, for calling back in. And I believe Mike White is also going to call in. He had to get on the road and head up north for a meeting, so
Oh, okay.
we'll give him a minute. We'll go ahead and we'll get started. Mike will call in here in a second. So the purpose of our executive session was to go over personal matters regarding the executive director, specifically to review some surveys or evaluations that we've done. I'm proud to say that the team, the staff of the Left 2 board conducted a survey, and the results were very positive. And on behalf of the trustees ourselves, we had also very positive results, and there were many very good comments regarding our executive director. There's also a number of suggestions and some input put out across that. And so the thought was that the administrative team, myself, Adai, and Jason, will meet with the executive director, scale down some of the goals that have been put down in place, and try to find maybe 3 or 4 items that we can evaluate through the rest of 2018. The process is ongoing, which is positive. It's something that I think all organizations should look at. Hello, Michael.
This is Michael.
Hi, Michael. So we have the opportunity to continue doing the work. Now, historically, it sounds, and I haven't been in this position very long, but it sounds like the evaluation process has been something that has been done, I'll say on and off, mostly on, right? And I'm looking at our executive director, and but something that we feel that should be done on an annual basis, and will continue to do so. So maybe Steve, you can mention about kind of the history of where it came about, how often you've done it.
Well, you did adopt a new policy
Yep.
last year relating to this, and that will more formalize it. In the past, it's been kind of more ad hoc, and it worked fine. It tended to be, if there was something you needed that I wasn't getting done, then you would let me know. And the meetings with each of you individually has helped kind of keep that going even when there wasn't an evaluation process. That's been much more effective in terms of providing that one-on-one direction that helps make us more effective serving you.
So as most of everyone knows, whether you're listening in or sitting in the audience, House Bill 2709 was passed and signed by the governor yesterday, which allows discretion and control for wage setting by this board. And at this time, we're still in a process looking at and evaluating what our goals shall be as a group, and we're going to move forward with that, utilizing our input from our AG's office. I do want to recognize our representatives Berquist and Holy and Senator Warnick for their work, all of you for bringing this issue forward. I think we were working inside of a situation that didn't necessarily work the way I had thought, and I want to thank you, publicly for your guidance and your leadership for getting this bill done. I think this is probably one of the more important bills, I think, from a Left 2 standpoint that we probably will ever do to maintain quality people and a quality person in the position. And we talked about recruitment, we talked about retention, and I think your work made it possible. So thank you very much. So, is there anything else before our group? You had a couple items, Steve.
Couple items.
Okay.
Couple items, Mr. Chair, real quick. I also, when I first became a director, I was told by another agency director, sometimes you get blamed for things you had nothing to do with, and sometimes you get credit for things that you didn't have anything to do with. Just, you have to learn to roll with both of those. But I would be remiss without saying that I consider a lot of the positive feedback that I got in my evaluation a direct result of the team that I have to work with. Thank you for supporting me and supporting them over the years. It's an extraordinary group. Couple of quick things. There is the emails that you have as board members. Tammy wanted me to remind you there is a migration that's going on. It should be invisible to you. Your email may look a little bit different after it happens, but other than that, it should be invisible. If it's not, if you suddenly have issues getting onto your email, and this happens on the 1st. So if beginning in April, suddenly you have a problem with your email that you didn't have before, Tammy is the person to contact. When Ryan was talking about the cost exercises, just by way of reminder, the first exercise, the first cost that we'll do will be the free survivor benefit that was not completed last year, and then the final average salary period will be after that, and then after those two, it's still kind of to be determined whether there's any more. We'll talk to you about that. And then there is one more actuarial item, as if you don't have enough, this will be an actuary-heavy interim. But with the adoption of the changes in the earnings assumption and the inflation assumption and the life expectancy assumptions, new factors are going to be required for the plans. Those new factors are adopted for Left 2 by the board. And we usually try to coordinate your adoption with the DRS adoption of new factors for the other plans so that they can roll out all their communication simultaneously. So that'll all take place late in the fall with adoption before December. And that'll all get on your work plan as well. But I forgot to mention that earlier. So with that, that's it.
Other questions, comments? All right, seeing none, we will be adjourned until our April, I'm going to say it wrong, 25th? Yeah, April 25th. So, all right, we are adjourned. Thank you.